Hello, everyone. This is RJ, and I want to thank everyone for joining us today as we are gathered for our PRG Relaunch webinar. I do have to share a disclaimer that this session is recorded right now, so we can upload it on the website, and all of the recordings will be able to be accessed on vemc.org/PRG. And we have a tab for our Relaunch webinar season 2. With that said, I wanted to start by just asking everyone to remember that this Relaunch webinar season 2, which will be starting today, will be held every last Wednesday at 1 p.m. And some people ask, why did we change the time? Since we had saw a lot of people coming and accessing the recording, we thought that it might be better for us to record it early in the afternoon. And also that will give us time to upload it on our website and our YouTube link by the end of the afternoon, so people will be able to access the webinar afterwards. There's a couple of things that I also wanted to share, that this webinar will continue every month. And we have various speakers who are lined up, hoping that this will be a resource for the churches as we enter and prepare ourselves to the post-COVID world. I am going to talk about the post-COVID world, but I wanted to highlight there are a couple exciting speakers that we have. Like, we have Rachel Gilmore, who is from our conference, who's working on how to prepare for a post-COVID relaunch. We have Alan Stanton. He's a person who wrote a book about rural churches, and we're going to have a special session only for our small church ministries. We also have J.R. Briggs, who had written a book called A Time to Heal, and I have it here. And J.R. will come and he will talk about how the churches can be a healer for this world in this time of COVID. And that will actually be aimed right before, 6 weeks before All Saints Day, which we believe is going to be an important time for our churches to carry out our mission of being a healer. I do want to make sure that we all understand that even though we say it's a post-COVID relaunch webinar, we are not yet there. As you all know, the Delta variant is a very strong strain, which is affecting our effort of fighting against this pandemic. As a church community, we ask that we will be influencers to encourage others to be vaccinated, because we know that vaccination is the best way to fight against this pandemic. And at the same time, you all might have heard that the CDC had issued a new guideline. And I want to remind us that the CDC is an advisory to the president and also to the states. Normally what happens is Governor Northam might respond to that advisory. Whether or not Governor Northam responds, we would like to ask you to make sure that you keep in track of all the announcements from the CDC. Also, see if your area that you are in is a highly contagious area. And I believe if you have that as a data, that might be a good indication for your churches to revisit your MAP, mitigation assistance plan, and see if there is any kind of revision that is needed. So with that said, what I wanted to do is I wanted to start us up with a word of prayer. Now, are you seeing the screen of the PowerPoint, or are you seeing my computer screen is the question that I wanted to ask. Is everybody seeing my PowerPoint screen? Great. Okay, with that said, I always think that it is important for us to start with prayer, because this is a time that our churches have to pray. And I do believe that for us gathered here in this online setting, I think it will be important for us. It will be very fruitful for us to have a time of prayer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask us to join in this time to pray. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some background music, and I'm going to share what of the subjects that I would like us to pray for and with. And after that time of prayer, I will close, and then we will jump into our webinar. So please join me in this time of prayer as we pray for the world and as we pray for our churches. So join me in prayer, and where you are, we ask you to pray and lift up all the people in this world who are suffering because of COVID. I also ask that you will pray that our effort of fighting against COVID-19, and especially the Delta variant, will be unified, be effective, and in that we will see God's hands and God's grace leading us. So join me in this time of prayer. Let us pray together. 하나님, 이 시간 우리가 주님 앞에 모인 것을 기도하며 COVID-19 때문에 실망하고 불만을 못하니 주님이 역사해 주셔서 하나님의 은혜와 사랑을 경험하게 해주셔서 아버지 하나님, now, at this time, I would also like to invite us to pray for all our 1,100 churches around Virginia as they prepare to relaunch and continue to serve this world. Let us lift up, especially our youth and children ministries, remembering that they are our next generation. They are a generation who is growing up in this odd time, knowing that it is truly the love and the grace of Jesus Christ that they need. And it is our mission to present the good news to them. So let us have a time to remember all the churches, and especially our next generation ministry. Let us pray together. 우리가 이 시간, 기도의 시간에 모였습니다. 어제는 주님의 기억, 하나님을 나누기 위하여, 하나님 그 사랑을 나누기 위하여 헌신하고 주의 사역들을 드리겠습니다. 하나님 이들 한 사람 한 사람 잡아주시옵시고, 하나님 이들의 삶 가운데 주님께서 이들을 통하여 하나님 인물을 하나님 주님 나아가게 해주시고, 우리 사역들이 변하게 해주시고, 우리 사역이 복음의 능력을 가지게 하소서. 하나님 우리 사역들이 주의 사랑을 나누게 부족합니다. 주님 함께 하시고, Lord, we thank you for this time that we can come together through our connection and through the grace that you pour out into our lives and also into our churches. We are grateful because of your grace, and we are grateful because of your call. But at the same time, we know that we cannot do this alone. At the same time, we know that we have many questions that we might not be able to answer. So we ask that you'll be with us today as we are gathered to come together as people of your call, to come together who are connected by your love and also through the United Methodist Church. to come and encourage and come and help each other to answer our questions and respond to this world with your love and your grace. So be with us as we pray in the name of Jesus. Amen. So I would like to just thank you once more for joining us. And today we have a special guest, Reverend Nikki Morero Howard, who is the Associate Director of Learning Ministries, will help us to find ways how we can prepare for back to school and back to church Sundays as we are preparing to relaunch in this time of COVID. So I would like to invite Nikki and also see how God will work through this time. So Nikki, can you take the lead?
Sure. Thanks, RJ. It's glad to be here with you all. RJ, can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me? Awesome. Okay. I realized my mic wasn't plugged in, and so I just plugged it in. I wanted to make sure y'all could hear me okay. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. All right, so you should be able to see my screen, and if you can go to either on your computer or your phone, Menti, www.menti.com, there's a code that you put in there, and we're going to reflect a little bit. I'm just curious. You can also, if you're not able to do that, just drop it in the chat if you don't have access to menti.com or an extra device that you can do this on. So I'm curious just to know from the group, we've got a good group gathered, what exactly you have done before with back to school. So what are some things you've done, things you're excited about, things that your church always does every year. So what are some of your back to school activities? Blessing of backpacks. Yeah, I think we'll see a few of those. Back to school backpack collection, third grade Bibles. Yeah, that's a big one. Blessing of teachers also. Stuff the bus. Are those school supplies? Yeah, let's scroll down a little. Prayer cards for students. So about 30 more seconds. Buy supplies for children that are needy. A social worker passes them out, yeah. Back to school picnic. Student kickoff parties, yes, all of that. Staff retreat, yeah. Clothes closet for kids, no walls, backpacks. All right. I am going to move us forward. You'll have a chance to share more later. So for the conversation today, this is how I'm thinking about back to school. Back to school is church activities. Back to school at church includes a variety of these activities. So we're talking about programs that maybe happen in worship, and they can happen with students and educators of all ages. So that's what we're talking about specifically here. So I break this down into 3 areas: backpack, briefcase, bag blessings. You see those done in different ways. Local school connections and college students. So I'm going to give you a little bit of information and share some resources about each of these. And then we will share these slides with you and make them accessible on the website. So if you have questions about these links and you want to have more direct access to them, we'll have that available. And if you have any questions during the presentation, hold on to them. We'll have a chance at the end for some Q&A. So this is a backpack blessing at a church that I served at. It was a tiny church. We probably worshiped about 30 a Sunday. There weren't a whole lot of children in the church, but sometimes grandchildren visited. And this was the second year that we did backpack blessings. And we had a few kids who were present, and we just had them bring their backpacks down. We prayed with them during the children's message. It was a very simple thing to do, really easy for a small church and a way to get folks involved. So something to think about with backpack blessings is that they are for more than just your students. You can bless your K through 12 students. You can bless college student bags. You can bless backpacks for your teachers or their briefcases or whatever bags they take with them to school. I've even had it with professors there. So there's a whole wide range. Administrators would be welcomed to be part of that, or anybody who works in the school system. It's a really great way to bring in the whole community. Another suggestion that I've seen with backpack blessings is backpack kits that are for youth. And these come with all kinds of fun swag. There's a link there that shares a way to put together a backpack kit, and that's from Seedbed. And you can find that pretty easily. If you're not sure what to do to create your backpack tags, if you haven't done tags before for backpack blessings, look up on Pinterest and you'll see lots of things. So for our Welcome Back Sunday at this small church, we really did it up big. We set up the whole altar. We had collected a few items, not a lot, but a good amount that would help some of our students. And so this was an exciting thing and an easy activity for any size church. Oh, and I see also bus drivers at our blessing. That's a great way to think about everyone who's part of that. You'll see a link on this page as well.
Sorry.
Hi, welcome. We're glad to have you. You'll see a link here on our page that gives you a link to the blessing that's actually on our UMC website. It's with the GBOD, and so, or the General Board of Discipleship. So you can reach out to them, or you can connect to the link there with them, and they'll have a bunch of ideas for you. So other resources, I highly recommend Pinterest for these kinds of activities. So we're going to talk a little bit about ways that you can connect beyond the local church. And we have another guest speaker, and I'll let her introduce herself when we come to her. But we're just going to talk about ways that we've connected with elementary schools, because back to school is a great time to do that. When I served as an associate at Good Shepherd, this was in the Baltimore, Washington conference, we had two elementary schools that were really close by. One was a private Catholic school, and the other was a public school, but they both had a really big need for an after-school program. And somehow this tiny church with like 30 members made this happen. And so we had an after-school program every day of the week with volunteers from the church and from the community. It was an incredible program, and we just recognized a need, and we started making this great connection with the two schools that were in walking distance. And so we would go and meet the students and walk them to the church, and then we would have this great after-school program for about 3 hours every afternoon. So that was one way. We just reached out to those two schools, and they had the same exact need. And then at St. Matthew's in Annandale, where I also served as an associate, we made this great partnership through teachers and social workers and even substitute teachers that were part of our school who were connected to Wayne-Oak Elementary. And so we worked with that elementary school, and particularly with their social worker and their counselors and their principal, to identify specific needs. And we ended up getting to be part of an incredible program that included a monthly Amazon wish list that the administrators would put together for students in need. It included a feeding ministry, so it would provide weekend meals for the month for students who needed extra food, who didn't get those meals on the weekend. And then we also did a bunch of extra projects throughout the year. And we had such a good relationship with this school that a phone call could be made. There was a student who didn't have a bed to sleep in, and they made a phone call to us. And St. Matthew's is a large church and has resources from their members. And we just sent it out to the membership, and within 10 minutes, that student had a bed to sleep in. So I'll let you introduce yourself, Pamela, and tell us a little bit about what you're doing at Fairfax and how you're connecting to the elementary schools in your area. You're muted.
Sorry about that. Our church is set up with 3 pillars. So we have a worship pillar, a mission pillar, and a learning pillar. And our kids and youth ministries come under our learning pillar. And one of the ways that we've tried to build some more connection between mission and learning is by putting those 2 pillars together and making sure that the mission goals and the kids and youth goals are kind of an alignment. So we've reached out to our local elementary schools and have points of contact there, similar to what you were talking about, Nikki, is figuring out what are the needs and how can we meet them instead of just kind of deciding what we want to provide for them. What we discovered is that there is some tremendous hunger issues and food issues. And the food that we were able to provide through some of our food pantry opportunities at the church were not available to them because they don't have transportation. So we now have the school identifying for us who are the most at-risk families. And then we utilize our mission van, which mostly is used by the youth. But now we have something called mobile ministry, and we load up bags of fresh food, milk, eggs, chicken, and we get vegetables donated from the local farmers market. They donate about 30 baskets of fresh food and vegetables for us. And then we take those to the kids' homes that have the greatest food shortage. So then we also identify what are the primary needs in terms of supplies and resources. And that has also allowed us to structure our August and September drives to meet those particular needs. So kind of similar to what you're doing. We also looked into how do we provide more programming for people who don't have access to get to the church. And so we took a VBS on the road and we took it to a park that was right next to serving that school community. And we set up a half mission and half kids event so that we provided a meal for them, a cookout, hamburgers and hot dogs, food. We had backpacks and supplies distribution, everything from the supplies that they've taken to the school, the things they might need at home, printer paper, things like that. And then we also had activities to engage the kids and make some connections with some of the people in our church. So that was very successful. And, we're looking forward to figuring out how we can bring more of our programming from inside the walls back out, into the community where they might be able to engage with us a little bit more.
Thanks, that's great. So I think what we're hearing really is that now, especially right now here, as August is about to begin, it's a great time to go and meet the administrators, the counselors or social workers at the elementary schools and just make a connection, get to know them. You might recommend this as well, Pamela, but I know I recommend if you have a pretty regular volunteer who is really committed to children's ministry, have them come with you so that it's just not a staff person, but somebody who's a member of the community and will want to be committed to that because as pastors, we're transient and that church member can continue a ministry that you may not be able to continue. So that is always a big motivating factor if you can get somebody to join you in that. We'll talk more about volunteers here in a little bit though. I just want to say another word about connecting beyond the local church. Please connect with your college students. They may no longer be in your pews, but they are still part of your community. And so there are a bunch of ways that you can get connected to them. But I know that my local church when I was in college sent me a Starbucks gift card, $5, that's all it was, but they sent one to me every fall, and they sent one during our finals every year. And that was such a great gift. And I used to do that. You can even do it through email if you don't have addresses, but you have email addresses. It's a really great way to stay connected to your college students. And if you have college students who are in college or entering, we highly encourage you, please, please, please do this. Follow this link. You can find it really easily, vaumc.org/new students. And let us know about college students. Our campus ministers across our conference are reaching out to students right now to help them get into the campus ministry, learn about the campus, and just get connected. And so we want your students to get connected. And so if you fill that information out or just contact the campus minister directly, they are all excited and willing to help you make those connections. So we have a question while we're talking about our Methodist students. It can be really tricky to find out from a local university or college if there are Methodist students there. One of the issues is that that's just not information that colleges collect. The other piece of that is it's not information that they might be willing to give someone that's not already connected to the university. Your best bet is to work with campus ministries that are established or college students who are already active on that campus. If you can get to know professors, when I was at Good Shepherd in Baltimore, I started working with a Catholic campus ministry because we were, 5 minutes away from a university, and the best connection there happened to be the Catholic campus minister. So that's who we started working with.
Can I add one thing on that, Nikki?
Yeah, go ahead.
One of the things that I was really surprised that made a difference in our church is we had a person in the church who wanted to make a donation and help singers in the music program become a part of our church on what they called a scholarship. Mm-hmm. So they created a scholarship where they auditioned and then they became weekly performers in our choir and soloists and things like that. And they had an obligation just to practice once a week and to be at the worship in the morning. So we picked up 4 college students that way. And then what we found is that those 4 college students then talked about our church and brought back some of their experience of what we were doing or the mission opportunities we had. And so sometimes if you have people who are saying, I want to help with mission or outreach or something like that, I want to make a donation, but I don't know to what, that a scholarship idea with a local college can also help create a connection or a lifeline.
Yeah, I actually did that in undergrad. We connected to a local church, and they just reached out to our choir director and said, we can pay 4 of your students if they want to sing with us. And we created this incredible community. We loved that church and they loved us. And that scholarship helped us to pay for simple stuff like, books, or sometimes it was just enough so that I didn't have to eat in the cafeteria that week. But it was also wonderful having a church community. And so that was just a really great experience as a college student. And so yes, absolutely reach out and find out. Yes, so we do have a process to submit names of students and a database. That's part of my job specifically. And that is on that link that is there. It's if you go to vaumc.org/new students, you can, you'll see there's a form that you can fill out and that will go directly to our campus ministers. I think we got $25 a week. That's what but that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
So I don't know what you do now.
A little bit more than that, but yeah.
Yeah. But I think
can I just interject? I have put the vaumc.org/new students on the chat. So if you can do that, that will be connecting directly to our campus ministers. And I will also say this, it has to work both ways. for the churches who are near the campus college needs to be connected to any kind of campus ministry, whether it is our Wesley Foundations or others. And also what needs to happen is to churches who are sending, not only that, if you can give us the information, if you can also reach out to a nearby United Methodist Church and tell the pastor that a student from your church is heading toward that way, I think that would be very helpful for us to, from both ways, be proactive in reaching out to our new college students. And there might be just one more thing. During the time when they're settling, just keep on find a church to settle in for the next 4 years. With all the online ministry that has been developed, maybe that might be an opportunity for them to continue to be connected to your church. Yeah. Before I turn this back to Nikki, I did want to ask Reason Chandler, you had raise your hand. I was wondering if you had a question or if there's anything urgent that you wanted to address. If not, if you can lower your hand, that'll be nice. And at the end, we will have a Q&A session. And not only that, we will highlight the questions that were submitted. We also, if you have a question to answer, you raise your hand in the Q&A session and we will allow you to talk. So thank you very much. I'm sorry that I interjected. Nikki, if you can carry on, that would be great.
So you find the question about finding students is I would just reach out to the college choir. There's somebody who can help you do that there. Great. So we've talked a little bit about back to school, but we're going to transition to talking about back to church. And remember, you'll have time to ask more questions if those come up. So you can go to menti.com or you can add it in the chat. What traditional things does your church do? What have you done? What things do you like to do at your church for that back to church kind of kickoff activities? So you can share those now and we'll share for a couple minutes and see what comes up. Back to church picnics, yeah. I think we see a lot of those. And RJ's provided the link in the chat. If you just want to click the link, you'll be able to participate that way as well. So other kind of back to church activities. Picnic seems to be all we've heard so far. That's fine. I'll give y'all like another 30 seconds. Youth pool party, box lunches, homecomings. Yeah, Sunday school kickoff's a big one. Iced coffee, muffins, and Polaroid with the pastors. Kids scavenger hunt, that's awesome. A carnival, family game night with youth ministries, youth families, yeah. Return to multiple services. A photo booth, yeah. Sports fest, that sounds like fun. An ice cream social. A hayride, that does sound like all right. Oh, we got another one. Sundays. How cute. Okay, so let's talk about back to church. So this is kind of the idea I have of what we're talking about, but kind of kickoff events. They have the goal of welcoming church members and new guests following the summer season. Of course, this takes on a different meaning in the pandemic season of ministry. And so what does back to church look like as people are coming back to church with more regularity, hopefully? So these are some of the things that I'm thinking about with back to church that we're going to discuss. A kickoff picnic, kind of potluck. You're kicking off program ministries, children, youth, adult discipleship. This might include something like a Sunday school fair. And often back to church includes a ramp up of your welcoming ministries. Most of us, I think, are familiar with the idea of a kickoff picnic or potluck. Some of these happen after Labor Day. And the way that I've seen most of them done, at least in my experience with the churches I've served at, is the church provides like the meat portion, and then people are invited to bring potluck items. Sometimes these are done by your UMW or UMM groups. And sometimes they bring all areas of the church together. So there's lots of different ways to make this happen. If you have questions about how to put that together, let's talk about that in our Q&A time. But we're going to spend a little bit more time talking about our program ministries. And we're going to let RJ handle those questions more directly about how to handle the Delta variant and COVID-related items. So this is obviously pre-pandemic. A kickoff or relaunch for program ministries. A lot of us are relaunching ministries, including myself. We're relaunching children and youth ministries here at the conference office. But I want to talk a little bit about what it looks like to do a relaunch for children's ministries, youth group, and adult discipleship. I just want to see what this is. Okay. So, Pamela, can you share a little bit about how you've launched children's ministries and what some of your experience is with that?
We actually are bringing kids back in September, so we haven't actually launched it yet, but and we're in the process of refilling our staff position for that. So we're kind of in the dreaming stage of how we want to do that. I'm trying to help the church move into a reimagining zone. The tendency is to try to go back to creating a Sunday school class format again, because that's what we left behind. But I'm trying to move the church into thinking about reimagining how we do ministry for kids and moving them more into a worship experience, where we have a worship experience that's completely different than any kind of an educational experience, so that it feels like a step away from their school activities once they get back into the routine of going into their school classrooms. So our goal is to transition into something that feels completely different, because we're trying to change the dialogue around what church is, because we're trying to plant seeds of desire. We've had our families home for a year, and our biggest challenge right now is to retain the families that have gotten comfortable staying at home, and also figuring out how to recreate the desire to bring the kids back into worship. And so offering them something that they didn't already know about and might spark their curiosity is one of the ways that we're going to do that. So we're looking at change of location in the building, a change of structure. So we have a large group, small group format, worship music, worship experience, very experiential. And so there's a whole marketing that'll go along with that. Everything that we brand, how we brand it. We've been working on rebranding our ministry so that there's alignment between the kids and the youth. The curriculum, there's more alignment. And then also looking at how do we communicate a message that makes our program desirable, more so than staying home in your jammies with a cup of coffee. So.
Yeah, I definitely think that's part of it, as we're one of the pieces we'll talk hopefully more about is what it is to reimagine ministries. So a lot of concerns about COVID right now. And yes, I think I recognize, not saying that you should do potlucks just yet. We're just talking about in general things that back to church looks like. We'll need to be a little bit more creative about what that looks like now. RJ, did you want to jump in on that before we move on to youth ministry?
No, I would like to ask us to refrain those questions about COVID and Delta variant later down to the question and answers portion. We, like Nikki and Pamela is doing, they are suggesting things, but at the same time, we know that it has to be adjustable and customized according to where we are. And we believe that there should be a balance between how we mitigate, but at the same time, how we minister. So that's all going to be answered at the end of the session. But thank you for your questions. It's not that we disregard, and like I said, a disclaimer, we are not there yet. We are preparing for the new normal.
Yeah, thank you, RJ. And so on that note, when we think about kicking off youth ministry programs or relaunching youth ministry after the summer, I will mention that I think, at least for me in the ministries that I'm launching with our youth ministry, including our December retreat coming up for conference-wide youth, we are asking people to mask. And so for every event, that's just the reality of where we're at. So thinking about relaunching and kicking off youth ministry programs, a lot of stuff happens in this kickoff kind of space, but I just want to give you some important tips when you're thinking about relaunching your youth ministry. The first one is that kickoff event, whatever you do to kick it off, is not just a fun and games night. This is the connection point for your parents. This is an opportunity for new volunteers and old volunteers to be reconnected to the youth group, especially if they've been out during the summer or you haven't had weekly youth during the summer. This is also your time to get any forms filled out, get any waivers filled out, go over covenant kind of stuff and reminders of who we are as the youth group, if you have like a mission statement for your youth group or that sort of thing. This is also the time where you should have a calendar, and your goal should be to have at least a year-long calendar so that when you're doing the kickoff event, you're getting excited about what's coming next, and you can promote out some of these big events that are happening over the next few months. So that's one of the key things that happens at youth group. Every year in the ministries that I did when I led youth groups, at our kickoff event, we had our meal catered. And this would be something that you could do that would be COVID safe. You could have the meal outside, have it meals individually packaged so that you don't have everybody getting mixed in with everything else. So that's how I would do a kickoff or a relaunch. This is also, a lot of youth groups are now starting to do kind of swag things. Not all churches will be able to do this, but if you're able to, and you're able to do it at a low cost, you might be able to even just do like bumper stickers or stickers they could put on book covers or on computer cases. Those sorts of things would be really fun. And a little bit about adult discipleship as you're thinking about kicking off and relaunching. This is a great time for you with your adult classes to do a Sunday school fair and remind people of all of the Sunday school opportunities or even small group opportunities you have for adults. I always liked to start a small group that met at the same time as our youth group. So I would have an adult small group that I led, and then our youth group leader would lead youth. And that ended up being very successful because it was a connection point for our parents. So those are some things you want to think about, what kinds of things you're going to get ready to launch in adult discipleship. So let's hold off on this particular question since it's not related directly to relaunching, and we'll talk about youth if you don't have youth in attendance at your local church. So hold on to that question, remember it for our Q&A coming up later. So in some of the conversations in the conversation that Pamela and I had, I think we really identified that we're not just welcoming new members, but we want to look at welcoming old and new more broadly. So an important thing to consider is, who are you welcoming back to church? This may be your regular attenders who haven't been back to church in a while. So think broadly and creatively about who you might be welcoming back. Think about how you can create a welcoming environment. Some of y'all talked about ice cream socials or kind of coffee bar kind of ideas. All of this is to remember that your space isn't just for one certain type of people, but for all ages. So how do you make the space welcoming for children and for parents and for youth? How do you make it handicap accessible and make sure that it's easy for people to get in? How are you greeting people when they walk through the doors? All of this is part of that. And it's something you should be considering, even if you've been worshiping in person for the past 6 months, or if you're worshiping in person again for the first time in a year and a half. So think really broadly about all of those welcoming pieces. Did you have anything else to add to this, Pamela, before I move on to Methodism 101?
Well, I think for me, I always try to think about the psychology of the person who's walking in the building. So I always ask my staff, like, how are we making people feel is the biggest question. So while we have a lot of COVID restriction, we came back a year ago, so we've been kind of at this a little bit longer, but how do some of the COVID safety measures that we put in place make somebody feel coming back? So for example, when we were looking at how to mark off pews, like which one is jarring and which one is a little less obvious. And with signage, what does the signage look like? Does it look like a war zone, or does it look like hazard materials? Or is it a nice happy graphic that says what you need to say, but doesn't create a culture of fear? And so I would just walk your church and kind of think about that too. What visuals on the outside of your church? Are people coming back to a bare church, or have you planted flowers and things that create this new birth and new life perspective? So as you're walking, like start from your parking lot and walk in, like how does a new person experience us? Is always just kind of it's an old question, but especially important when we think about what we've put in place to keep people safe. Even gloves, like, we glove up, but does that create a culture of, oh my gosh, I shouldn't be in this space? And so how do we create gloves that are as least visually obtrusive as possible? So, yeah. Yeah,
when St. Matthew's and Fairfax are relatively close to each other. And so when we came back about the same time. I think y'all may have come back a couple weeks ahead of us, but we were pretty close in our timeline. And one of the things that was important to us, like you're saying, is what does it look like from parking lot to pew and back out again? And so our committee traced the steps, and we talked about where would people be parking? Who would they be seeing? How would they be interacting? And we had just started to do communion outside. And so that was from parking lot and outside to take communion. And so we thought about each point along the way and how to feel connected to one another during that whole experience. And so that's a really important point to think through. And this is at Good Shepherd in Baltimore, it was a much smaller church compared to St. Matthew's. The pastors stood out. We stood outside. We were kind of an urban setting church. We stood outside on the street in our robes every Sunday morning so that we were present and visible, and people knew that church was getting started. And so that was the way that we helped to create a welcoming space, was that we were accessible.
I love that. Also think about your language in the worship service. Like you need to make sure you're welcoming when you're greeting your congregation. You say a specific welcome to the people online. That somewhere in your sermon, you're speaking to the people online and you're saying, I know that some of you at home are probably nodding your heads right now, or, some of you might be rewinding that point or something, but also just recognizing that they're there is sometimes a way we have to welcome people that we might not actually be laying eyes on.
And if you have, in terms of also welcoming, if you have online, if you have volunteers, or if you have the staff, to be on Facebook, if you're on Facebook Live, to be interacting with that community, because that's a community of its own. That's part of the welcome. And so Mike Plasters and I, when we were leading worship online and in person, I would be, if I wasn't preaching that Sunday, I would be on Facebook talking and interacting with people during the service. And if he wasn't preaching that Sunday, he would be on Facebook. And so that was a way that we would welcome people. We would say good morning. We would greet people just like we would in person. So welcoming happens. That welcoming environment is both online and in person. Thanks so much for that, Pamela. So another thing that I think is really important to launch as you're relaunching is kind of a Methodist 101 or a living out your faith kind of adult discipleship class. We think a lot about that with confirmation, but we don't do it as often with adults. As people are coming back to church, hopefully coming back to church, this is a great time to do a small group for new and old members alike to bring them back. And I have some recommendations of resources here at the end, but I always have done that at the start of the year. So in September, people will know there's a Methodism 101 class starting. And hopefully that leads to new members, but.
I think it's good to do in conjunction with that, a key terms too.
Oh yeah.
Because key terms like salvation and grace and righteousness and
right.
language that we use so often, but I've had people say I struggle with not understanding your vocabulary. Mm-hmm. So
thank you. Yes. So we're going to talk a little bit about strategies to get there. And Pamela, if you can kind of guide us through thinking through the retention strategy, what a 0-point event is, and that 3-point strategy with children and youth ministry.
So I don't, proclaim to be an expert on any of this. As I've said to Nikki, I'm just sharing what my instincts have been and kind of what my learned experience has been. So I know there's a lot of people out there who have tremendous experience beyond what I know. So thanks for giving me this space. One of the things I feel with churches is that a lot of times we're sitting here talking about concepts that are beyond kind of where we really need to be. And so as a local church, in my mind, our number one strategy has got to be a retention strategy. And it has to be focused on how do we identify who the key people were in our church that were regular attenders? What is their rate of return at this point? And how many of them have come back? How frequently do they come back? And then what steps are we taking to kind of move them out of the couch back into the pews? Or how are we moving them out of once a month worship into twice or 3 times a month? The outreach and the community outreach is great, but if you don't have critical mass, you're bringing them into kind of a structure that might not feel alive to them. And so retention for me is critical, especially when it comes to kids ministry, because those families have been gone so long that we're all at risk right now that they might not find their way back into our buildings. So for me, as I work with our new kids director, it's going to be really focused on what's our retention strategy going to look like? And how do we measure if we have had a success rate with those who have kind of fallen away from us? So it'll be, how do we communicate with them individually? How do we market to them? What kind of marketing campaigns? Everything's got to be branded. You can't host an event without a great brand. So for example, we're doing backpacks and collecting money for school supplies. Instead of just saying we're collecting backpacks, we're doing pencils and packs. And so everything's branded pencils and packs. So think about the marketing, because our people are accustomed to marketing campaigns in the secular world. As far as the 0-point learning, I call it 0-point entry. I got it from, when you go to a pool and it has those beach entries where they're kind of gradual and you kind of enter in like a beach, and before you know it, you're going in, but you don't really jump in. 0-point entry events are the things that I say, how many 0-point entry events do we have where somebody can connect with our church or our people, but they don't need any institutional knowledge? Because that seems to be one of the key deterrents from people getting involved in your small groups and in your programming, because they have a fear of being found out, that they don't know enough about the Bible, which is what I discovered as a kids director was the key inhibitor for people not becoming a volunteer, is fear of being found out that they don't know enough about the Bible. So 0-point entry event might be like a lunch bunch that we started where it's only a social activity, pure social, drop in, no reservations. You just come, bring your bag lunch, and we sit outside on a porch and eat lunch together and get to know each other. Or that we're going to do an activity that anybody can join. And that then can transition to a learning opportunity like, hey, I'm going to be taking this class. Do you want to join us for a learning opportunity? Because once you make a friend in church, you're more likely to engage in your learning opportunities. And then we can move them into a discipling path. So 0-point entry, I would just really assess like how many of those do you have, and then how can we create them where we don't have enough of them. Sometimes concerts can do that. If you just are putting on a musical concert and people can just come and listen, but they don't have to necessarily disclose anything about themselves or communicate with people one-on-one. They can just come and be in the building. Is that enough, Nikki, or did you want me to keep going on that or move on to 3 point?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great. And we've included kind of the next steps beyond that, which are learning and then discipling. And so a learning experience is a small group that's not a covenant group that has like more intense guidelines or more heavy expectations for participation. So that Methodism 101 class at St. Matthew's, we called it the Path. That's an entry level. That's just beyond entry level. So you've been coming to worship and you've kind of done that 0 point, and now you're ready to move a little beyond. That's learning. Yeah. And then these discipling ones are more in depth. This is, a small group that you're expected to read every week, or you're going to share more personal experiences. You're going to covenant with each other to be together for this certain amount of time. Those are discipling things. And so this is one way to look at it. There are lots of other ways. This is just one way we're sharing now as we're thinking about relaunching. Yeah. Did you want to add to that?
No, I just, we did in creating our paths too, we tried something like I feel like at our church, we need to work on creating self-teaching learning opportunities. Our secular world is very much individually driven. And so people go online and watch videos and content and kind of learn about their politics or learn about their health or whatever it is, it's self-driven. And churches have been slower to get behind that. And so what content can we create? We're weak in this area. I really want to drive us towards more self-teaching content so that some of those fundamental courses can be done in person. But you might also be able to take a self-teaching course online. And then when you step into your first course, you don't feel like, I don't know who the MVPs of the Bible are, but you've already gone through that self-directed and you feel a little bit more familiar and more courageous to take something. So either providing the links to to get some knowledge or somebody creating the videos. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm going to bug RJ here. RJ, can you hop on and talk a little bit about what you were doing in terms of creating those kinds of videos?
Videos in terms of
that, kind of like we had talked about, you would create videos about just some basic Bible content.
Exactly.
With folks
so the reason why I did it is because I knew that a lot of people, when they gather, they don't want to teach. I'm sorry, for a small group leader, they have a hard time teaching, but they want to talk. So when we had a 1 hour session, they didn't want to consume the entire time of lecture. So instead of a leader or someone like me coming in and preaching or leading a teaching, we pre-recorded the session in the lecture and put it on YouTube. And we sent them a YouTube link, and they were able to watch it before they came, and the conversation, the small group gathering was fully engaged in the conversation. What we had learned later on is that YouTube link was shared with some of the people, because after they saw the lecture, they would say, this is interesting. My pastor said this, and they'll send it to their friend. And that actually became a point where they could invite them and say, you want to talk about this over a cup of coffee? It's not that I have all the answers. It is more about just engaging in that conversation. And probably the same way that we're doing right now is we don't have the answers for you to relaunch ministry. In this conversation and asking, going back and forth, we're hoping and praying that there will be an insight that comes out from this, that you will be able to do the ministry and lead the ministry in your context.
Nikki, can I add one more thing?
Yeah.
So when we were all shut down and we weren't able to connect, in case people don't know about this resource, Amplify Media, which is like an online media platform where you can access courses and lectures and content and share them with your people. So even if you have people who are still home and you want to provide video content, those are already done for you. So you can say, hey, I'm looking for, like I would get on and we were having a topic today about, I don't know, mercy. And I'm going to type in and see what videos are out there about mercy. And we could pull it up and share it, and we could watch it in our session. So if you have a congregation that's still not back in person, or you want to keep going with online learning, that has been a good tool for us. And right now media is another one, but it's more expensive because it's a bigger platform. So
yeah, and amplifies the Cokesbury.
Yeah, it's
that will have a lot of Methodist resources.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about the 3-point strategy and how you connect all of that when you're relaunching.
When I was a kids director, I remember when I first took over the ministry, it had kind of been depleted, and we had kind of lost a lot of our families, and we were kind of starting from the ground up. And I got in there, and I thought in the beginning that my ministry was about, serving the kids in that actual programming in that hour. But I quickly discovered that I needed a 3-point strategy. And the 3-point strategy was, I need to create something that's desirable for kids, which means I need to think like a kid, not create Sunday school curriculum that feels like a school experience, but create an experience where they make a lot of friendships, have a lot of fun, and get fired up for Jesus. And then I needed to also address the volunteers, not just recruitment of volunteers, but relationship building, connectional opportunities, social opportunities, spiritual development, and what were my efforts to figure out how to minister to them as a population. And then the adults, which was the parents, and how do what am I doing to try to connect them to each other? So I would have specific events that were specifically targeted towards helping them build bonds. Because once they had a friend at church, they were more likely to come and look for their friend at church. And how do I also provide outlets and resources for them to learn, to grow, and to explore faith from a family perspective? So with that 3-point strategy, we were always able to kind of measure and see where we were heavy. Like I was heavy on kids at one point, but not strong enough in volunteer development, or not strong enough in adults, and not spending enough of my time working with the parents. I was too heavy on kids. And we were able to see the ministry start to grow once we had a better balance between those three areas. And I think the same goes to youth ministry. Is always thinking about your ministry as a 3-point strategy instead of a 1-point strategy.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's really true. And this extends to if you have a daycare or a preschool in your church. Your strategy with them shouldn't just be this kind of like if they're renting the space, financial exchange kind of a thing. You want to be able to think, the only times I think I ever heard from our preschool at Doolin was when we were worried about insurance kind of stuff. But we wanted to think beyond that, right? And so they hosted a regular, every time they came back, kind of their back to school thing, that back to preschool, they hosted this like kind of coffee bar in the narthex of our church for all the parents. And so all of the pastors and staff would hang out and get to know all the preschool moms and dads. So really that was a great point of connection and helped us to get people to come to church, because we'd share about the ministries we were doing and we'd promote everything. And the more that we started showing up at preschool events and inviting them and including them, they're relaunching too. They're kind of learning to do all the COVID stuff right alongside us. And so this is a great point of connection, and it shouldn't just be one point with them. You should be able to have a much broader connection with your preschools and daycares.
Yeah, and I can't emphasize enough, like we are in the relationship business, like relationship with God, relationship with Jesus, relationship with each other. And the core of relationship in our secular world is friendship. And so always looking at your 3-point strategy, where am I building friendship? Friendship between kids, because kids who have a friend at church will come to church. How do I give them space? So we changed our kids programming. So when they came in, we had basketball hoops, we had balance boards, we had a craft station, we had all these different places where they could play together and make friends. And then how do I build friends with the adults? So inviting my volunteers to lunch, or taking them to a concert, Christian concert, or inviting them all to come to my house for just an appetizer party, a deck party or something. But figuring out how to build friendships is a big thing in all 3 areas.
Thank you so much. So just some getting started questions with your team or on your own to reflect on if you're kind of doing it solo. How and where are you, where are you promoting your events? So there's lots and lots of resources out there to promote. Some of them are free, most of them are. There are several neighborhood kind of community online boards that you can post to. We really recommend that you, at least I would recommend that you find out what's going on in your community, resource those neighborhood boards and find out what's happening. Facebook is a good way to promote some things, but also depending on the target audience, you need to think through what you want to promote on Facebook versus Instagram. Kind of think about where and how you want to promote. Some people really need a newsletter because the event doesn't happen if it's not listed in the newsletter. That might not work for your youth. So kind of think through all of those pieces. We've talked a little bit about what we want people to experience and considering the feeling that we want people to have. Do you have anything to add to that before we move on?
I just would encourage people to think about where you're hosting your events as well. Make sure that you're in a really visible location. We shifted our events away from like our courtyard, which was kind of sunken down, up to the top grassy area way out by the corner where the street traffic was, just to get visual awareness. And we, our event was half just walk-ins and drop-ins because it was way out where we don't normally have it. So I just would encourage people to think about shifting the traditional location for your kids events as well, or youth events.
Yeah, and as you think about promoting stuff, one of the things that we had a huge success at Doolin in Falls Church with our Easter egg hunt. When we would promote it and then we would share it with the Falls Church City like Facebook page, and they would promote it. And so we would get hundreds of people at an Easter egg hunt. And Doolin is a small mid-sized church. And so because we had good volunteers and because we promoted well, we could have a really successful event. And that was one of the events that we did with the preschool. So thinking a little bit about what your space looks like, we've talked about that, but thinking about how it's welcoming people, thinking about how you might want to reimagine the space. Pamela talked a little bit about switching the space that they usually use to a new place and how that can create change and excitement. So I think we're ready for our Q&A, but I'm going to share a little bit before we get there. We're relaunching two here out of the Learning Ministries office. We're going to start children's ministry chats. Those are for anybody doing children's ministry. Those will be beginning in September. There's a youth ministry podcast out. We'll be launching a new episode soon and be doing monthly chats as well. And we're also relaunching our conference council on youth ministry. And our youth retreat will be December 3rd through 5th. You can click the link when we share this with you, or you can just go to vaumc.org and learn more about that. So I've got a list of resources. Again, this will be shared with you, but these are just some of my favorites. And I would add Amplify Media on there as well. I didn't think about that when I was pulling these together. I love Illustrated Ministry. If you haven't checked it out, they do have some free resources, but most of them you will have to pay for, but it's kind of a sliding scale. So if you have a really small church, you won't have to pay too much. Their resources are fantastic. I also really am a big fan of Spark House. They have great material. They do awesome one-room school, Sunday school stuff. I've had great success. I've transitioned 2 churches to Spark House, and it's just helped our Sunday school programs blossom. If you're looking at doing a Methodism 101 course, I love Living Our Beliefs. This is with Kenneth Carter wrote this. If you want to think more broadly about your welcoming ministry, I recommend God's Welcome. It's by Amy Oden. She really helps you to think through all the parts of what biblical hospitality looks like. And I did this with 2 small groups at St. Matthew's. I did one in the afternoon and one in the evenings, really different groups. One was an elderly group, all retired. And then one was kind of like young parents. And what we did was we created a huge welcoming ministry out of that. And so that was a really successful event. Share Church are the resources provided by Church of the Resurrection, and that is Adam Hamilton's church, but they have a lot of fantastic welcoming ministry resources. They also have just other resources. They put everything they do out for you to share, and it's free. This includes sermons and Bible studies. This includes all kinds of graphics. There's so much there. Seedbed has some Methodist resources and some not, but it's a good resource if you just want to find some free things that are accessible. It's great for youth ministry. And then I use YM360. This is not a Methodist resource, and you may have to tailor it to make it fit in a Methodist setting, but they provide great graphics, and you can get a packaged retreat or Bible study at a lower cost and get fantastic branding for your event. And so, including videos. So I use it for a lot of ministry things just because they put together such great graphics. And I think that's been really helpful in my ministry. RJ, did you want to add anything before we move on to Q&A?
No, I think we can go into Q&A, and let me talk about the COVID situation a little bit, and then we'll see if there's anybody else who would like to add on to the questions, and we will be able to help each other. So the whole purpose of this webinar is not that we have the answer, but is for us to come together and remind ourselves that we are in connection, and we pray that through that connection we'll be able to answer our questions. Especially with the Delta variant rising, I do have to say we have to be more on the air of caution. And we have to remember that 12 years old and under 12 years are not yet vaccinated. And you'll see a big difference between the families who have a child who is not vaccinated versus the families who have a child who are vaccinated. In my case, both of our children are vaccinated. So I am more different. My way of doing things might be different from a parent who does not have a child who is fully vaccinated. So whenever you are planning for something, I would say think in a mindset of a family who does not have everyone fully vaccinated. But at the same time, we remember that masking, social distancing, sanitizing, ventilation has been proven to be a successful mitigation method. And about masking, you'll remember that the pediatrician, our pediatrician, and especially one of our members from the PRG team who is a pediatrician, says that everyone over the age of 2 are to mask if they are unvaccinated. Now, for the new CDC advisory that came out, we will have to remind ourselves that that is advised for us to do it according to the locality. Now, when I say locality, it is also about the transmission rate. The CDC advisory said that in the highly transmission populations, that is where fully vaccinated people are to mask. And that is a place and a location where we want to make sure that there are more mask requirements or recommendations in those areas. If you want to see them, they are in the CDC website. We are also planning to share a resource list where you can find those datas and trackings of knowing the COVID situation around your area. Before we go to the question and answer, I just want to highlight this. Relaunching is going to be a task that we'll have to continue on because we are not yet there at the post-COVID era. But I also want to say this. This is going to be a time where we need a balance between getting rid of things that we had done that does not fit to the relaunching or the new normal, but also finding ways how we can revamp the things that we've done well that fits to this new normal. So I was going to share just one story that I heard. There's a church during the time of COVID that they had learned that they aren't, the two worship services that they have is not working anymore. So during the time of COVID, they had made a decision to combine these 2 worship services. But what they did is they wanted to make sure that the other time that they were at the church was used well. So they are actually starting a new I call it this way, a weekly vacation Bible study every Sunday on the time that they usually gathered for worship. And what happened is everyone who started to come into the earlier service that was combined are asked to volunteer for the second ministry that is geared toward an outreach to the children who lives around the church. So they were able to do what they knew well, which is leading a vacation Bible study. The only difference is to do it every week. And they were able to compact and make a big change during the time of COVID. So I'm not saying that we will all be in that situation. I hope that this would be a time for us to just remind us what we did well and give us some ideas how we can adjust to the new normal. So this is a time for us to do some questions. If you can put your questions in the question and answers. Also, if you have something that you want to voice out, please raise your hand. We will allow you to speak, and we'll see how this, our collective intelligence will help us to get some new ideas as we relaunch.
While we're waiting for questions to come in, I'll respond to the question we got about youth ministry. What do we do if you don't have any youth in your church? So there's a couple ways to think through that, but the first thing I would think through is start by growing your children's ministry. That's the very first piece, is to make good connections with your children's ministry program, or start your children's ministry program with whatever children you have there. Children's ministry will help you grow a youth ministry. That's really important to note, is that successful children's ministry programs grow youth. The other thing is, if there are local middle school or high schools near you, make connections with the administrators there and get to know them. It may not look like a youth group ministry, but it will still look like youth ministry. And so that's another way that you can do that. The other piece of that is, maybe your church isn't doing youth ministry in this season because there are other vital ministries, and that's okay. If you don't have a youth ministry, it doesn't mean you're failing at church. There are other great ministries that are happening. So if you want to talk more about that and talk about what it looks like to build a youth ministry, that is kind of my area. So I've been in youth ministry for almost 20 years, and my email is learning@vaumc.org. RJ, I think some of these questions look like they're for you.
Can you start with
yes, for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we will still be having the youth retreat at Eagle Eyrie. We will require masks for the events. And the only thing that I won't have as much control over, and this is because of the way Eagle Eyrie is set up, is that youth groups are in houses and they're not in like a big dorm setting. And so when that happens, when you go to your house, you are now under the authority of whoever your youth director or youth leaders are. So that will be up to your local church to determine in those settings. But we are masking for our event, whether you're vaccinated or not.
Great. And now I will answer the question from Michael. These are all going to be on the website, and I want to show you how to get to our website. There will be some emails that lead you to this. So if you go on to vaumc.org, or you can go directly to vaumc.org/PRG, this will be the page that you go to. And if you just scroll down a little bit, we want to make sure that everything that we share here or any of the emails that we have are all accessible on the website. If you could just go down a little bit more, you'll see this tab where it says PRG Relaunch Webinar Season 2. And if you go on to this, what we will do is we will make sure that all the YouTube videos, anything that you need, especially the resources that Nikki and Pamela had shared, also our evaluation, and also which will be CEU request form. That will all be on this website. We have not yet updated this, but this will all be updated hopefully by this afternoon, and you'll be able to go there. I will give you a direct link just in case anybody wants in the chat, and you'll be able to not only access the videos, you can access all the resources. You can also request for a CEU and give us some feedbacks as we continue on in this endeavor of providing resources to you. Great. Is there anybody else who has a question? So if we don't have any questions, I would like to thank Nikki and Pamela once more for guiding us and providing this time for us to think and envision. And I like that word, Pamela, when you said imagine, because this is truly a time that we need to imagine, and we need to see how God continue to work through our time together. I did want to share in the chat, of course, and I'm going to send a follow-up email to everyone who had been attending evaluation form, which will be a Google form, and you'll be able to fill out this form and request a CEU. Now, if there's anything that does not work, please let me know, and I will make sure that I respond. Please let me know by emailing me at serving@vaumc.org. Now, I did want to share just one more announcement before we go. In the evaluation, as you respond, as you fill out the form, you will get an automated email that will give you the website that I shared, and also the registration for the next session that we have. Next session will be held on the last Wednesday, and we are inviting Rachel Gilmore, who will be our guest. She will do the same thing of talking about how we can prepare for a post-COVID world. And she is going to talk about relaunching in a different way. Following this August webinar, we're going to have 2 special webinars on September. And right now, we're almost final with our speakers and also the date. And this will not be, the 2 special seminars will not be, 2 special webinars will not be on the last Wednesday, but instead it will be on the first and second Wednesday. The first Wednesday would be geared toward small church ministries. And we have invited Alan Stanton, who is an author of Rural Churches in America, and he has a heart for rural churches and small churches. This will be a time, if you are in a small church ministry, please look forward to this as a follow-up of our August webinar. Another follow-up that we're going to have on September 8th, which is a second Wednesday, will be with Reverend Steve Hay, who is a retired clergy and also preparing to be a coach. And we're going to talk about Simple Church. Now, Simple Church is a book from Tom Rainer, but we think that this is a time for us to kind of simplify our ministry and really refocus to our mission. So those information will all be on the Relaunch webinar season 2. I want to, and that is it with my announcement. Nikki and Pamela, if you have any words, final words before we go, I wanted to hear from you, and then we can close with a word of prayer.
I'm good. Thanks for being here, Pamela.
I had a couple extra thoughts, but I'll hold them because I know you're wrapping up. But my brain is just going ping, 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 ping. So.
Oh, we'd love to hear your thoughts, though.
Okay. So one of the things I've been guiding my youth director in is, as we're scheduling your events, if you're just coming back, when you look at your kids in your youth ministry, you always look at your content and what portion of your content is relational, friend building, discipling, and worship. And what you want those margins to be really heavy on the friend building, the relationship building, and the worship in the beginning, and smaller on the discipling. And then as you get people back, then you start building out that discipling a little bit more so that you're more discussion heavy. But don't come back really heavy on the discussion. You got to come back on the big relational side of things first, and then wean your way back to, does that make sense?
Yeah,
look at your margins, and if you're going to plan an hour, your first 75% needs to be heavy on the relationship building, then work your way back out. So I don't know if that was helpful or not, but and that has really helped our youth start to pick up steam, and we've really started to grow. So I forgot to mention that. Sorry. And the other thing is Worship House Media has a site called Worship House Kids, and it has great kids videos and places where you can start building your worship, portfolio of songs that you want to play. And I forgot to mention that. So that's it.
Yeah, that's another great resource. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for
everybody.
Your information. Thank you for your leadership and everyone's leadership during this time as we are preparing for post-COVID world. I'm going to ask Nikki to close in a word of prayer, and then we will be able to dismiss everyone.
Let's pray together. God, we give you thanks that you have brought us here to learn and grow and reimagine what it is to be the church. As we relaunch children, youth ministries, and adult discipleship, as we go back to church and back to school, we ask that your blessings be upon this conference and every church, every pastor and volunteer, every staff member. Because God, we know that you have called us to be your servants, and we are eager to welcome one another back. God, we pray for our churches as we continue to struggle through this pandemic. Help us to not only be healthy, but to be smart. God, we give you thanks that you keep calling us even in this season of struggle. Bless our ministries and bless us to your work. Amen.
Thank you, RJ.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a good day.
Have a great one. Thank you, everyone.